Hey you guys! Here I am in my living room. I decided to switch from my dining room because I'm bored. Hope y'all are doing well. So, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about Emily Dickinson. She was such a lovable weirdo to me. She was kind of a recluse, and by the end of her life, she would not even see people unless she had a full veil on or a curtain between her and the people. I'm just like, man, she's so fun and weird. So anyway, let's talk about our three poems that we had to talk about. Or that we read for homework. I heard a fly buzz when I died. You guys, oh, this is my favorite, maybe one of my favorites of all time. I just love this poem. And I think it's because we take something that seems like it's so big, like the dying process, and then we kind of put it in with something that's kind of small and grody, like a fly. So I want to go through it, and I did draw something, so I'll show you that in a minute. But for right now, I want to go through it and kind of talk about what was happening. And so basically, what we have happening in this poem is we have picture the scene. We have this person, I always say a lady, but it's a person, who is dying. And so whenever they talk about the stillness in the room, we're sitting here looking at a situation where it seems like we are waiting for this person to die. And so the heaves of storm is that person taking their last breath. And so we know that this is kind of already happening because the people have cried their tears, they've cried to a point they're dry. And so then, whenever they say, for the last onset, when the king, one of the things, and this is kind of my thought and some stuff I've read, obviously, but the king, especially with the capitalization, even though her capitalization is very haphazard anyway, is maybe God. And so we have to kind of think about a lot of things here. So now we've got heaves of storm, last breaths happening. There's a king inside the room now all of a sudden. So I was like, oh, that's weird. And then we go back to our poem where she says, I had willed away every part of me that I could will away. And so the only thing that was left was this dying person. And then there came a fly. And it's kind of interesting. And that fly, whenever they did it, whenever that fly was in there, blew uncertain, stumbling buzz. So if you picture this in your mind, we have somebody who's sitting there and they're dying, right? And then the last thing that they think about before they die is a fly. Now, we can look at this in a couple different ways. Number one, we can look at it as this is just a story about somebody's death being interrupted by a fly, and this moment that was supposed to be beautiful and precious was kind of minimized by a fly. I like that. I mean, I feel like that's fun. There are a couple other ways that people like to describe this. One that I've read, and this is kind of a fun one, is that we kind of need to start thinking about the fly and what the fly was doing. And so that's where I decided to go ahead and make you a drawing. So I made you a drawing. So here's our dead person. Okay, here's our dead person. And so now the dead person's there or dying, and they see the king inside the room. So if the king is God, then that person is seeing God. And then they use the word interposed. And so interposed means kind of got in the middle. So we have this fly that came in between this person and the king. What? That's crazy. Okay, and so we have to think about some of the symbolism with that. I don't know if you've ever looked into much fly symbolism, but there is like this kind of lore that says the lord of the flies is Beelzebub. Look it up, Wikipedia, kids. But it's Beelzebub. And so another name for Beelzebub is Satan. And so some people have said there is a purpose for it being a fly versus a bee or a moth or something else or a wasp, whatever. That maybe there's more to this, that this person is like sitting here and they are almost in heaven and they have it, and then all of a sudden the fly comes in, yanks them away, and then this person goes to hell when they die. Maybe. I feel like that's kind of weird, but I think it's fun to think about. Then another one that people have also mentioned, same thing, except there is something interesting that happens in here. right at the end, when it says the windows failed and then I could not see to see, I think it's really interesting that it says I could not see to see. It seems like it's really important, you guys. And so my thought of that is, they that whenever that person died, I mean, we're already seeing something that's going on in the afterlife. And so the poem stops and it says, I could not see to see. And so maybe the fly is not that important at all. And this is just a story about somebody's death. And when they are done, that fly was there, but really they couldn't see to see. After it was over, there was nothing. So we live a life, here comes a fly, and then there's nothing. I don't know, you guys. I've heard a bunch of different ways of people interpreting this poem, but those are some ways of doing it. So there's that. We would have had a longer talking class, and I probably would have drawn more, but this is what we have. Okay, so I want to switch over to a much more upbeat poem. Some keep the Sabbath going to church. And so this poem is really about worship, and probably it's a big knock at traditional organized religion. And so what we have here is, she says some keep the Sabbath going to church. So some people go to church on Sunday. She says, not me. I do it staying at home. And so we kind of have to look up what these words mean, like a bobolink, excuse me, as a chorister. Basically, that's a bird, and she's basically saying the bird is the choir. And an orchard, which is, trees, for a dome. And so basically, then she says, some keep the Sabbath basically dressed up. And she says, the only dress that I wear is my wings, because she's like an angel. And instead of tolling the bell for church, and I love that word, you guys, tolling, it makes it sound like it's not a good thing, And so she says our little sexton, and it says custodian in your book, but probably what they're talking about there is the little person who kind of keeps the church, her church, which would have be the little animals who kind of twerp around her church. And she says God preaches instead of a man of God. God does the preaching. So she's basically saying, instead of witnessing somebody talk about God, I see God myself. And I think this is the biggest dig that I see. So instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. Because we have to think about organized religion. And I think about, I've always told you I grew up Southern Baptist. And, like the whole idea is you're good your whole life so that you get your reward in heaven when you die. And so she's saying, instead of even worrying about heaven, why not make heaven on earth and never have to worry about it at the end of your life? And so keep in mind, if you are thinking about writing your paper on transcendentalism, this is super transcendental. There's this huge connection between God and nature. So there's that. And then I'm looking at my time, you guys, I'm sorry. And then probably my last one, and this is the one that students often like, because I could not stop for death. And so what we see here is a person who basically, again, dies. You would see Emily Dickinson, a lot of her poems are about death. People are like, she's obsessed with death. So basically what we have here is this person who was just busy living her life, not thinking about death. And then death came and got her. And in a very gentlemanly way, though. Like, death stopped in his carriage, picked her up, and so she's in a carriage with herself, death, immortality. And so then we're just riding our little carriage to Death Town along. And I think it's really interesting here because she personifies death as being super civil. And so a lot of times, again, when we think about death, we think about like it's something to outrun, it's something we're afraid of. And in this situation, she sees it as almost a kind of civil gentleman. And then I think things take a weird turn. So they passed the setting sun, or rather it passed us. And I think that is kind of interesting about like just the passage of time. But then I think when we have the gossamer, the gown, the tulle, what we're looking at here is I think what I see here is almost a gown. And then they see, it says, we paused before a house that was a swelling. And so I start to think, well, what's a swelling? And I think about like when somebody's buried, right? When somebody's buried, the dirt is uneven for a little while, right? And so I start to think about, oh my gosh, something has happened in this little stanza here, that we've gone from this carriage ride to somebody talking from the grave, which is really weird. So we get to the swelling of the ground, and then they're outside. So the roof is, it makes no sense to me unless I start to think, again, she's telling it from inside the grave. So now she's actually telling us from inside the coffin. What? That's crazy. Okay, so basically, this whole story is it's very kind of dark, and so then lastly, we have the second where it says centuries feel shorter than the day. So basically, this person has been dead for centuries, and all of those centuries feel shorter than the day she died. And I think that's so interesting because again, we have this whole thing that maybe her life wasn't that important and almost her being dead's not that important, but the day she died really was important, which is almost in direct contrast with the fly buzzing. So again, I'm not saying I understand these completely. I know literature is about like how we see it, so kind of keep that in your mind whenever you read these things, that it really is all about how you see it. Some students think that I take it to complete crazy town. Others say, oh, you haven't gone crazy enough. So it is what it is. And if y'all have any questions, please feel free to email me. If y'all feel like you want me to start doing virtual office hours, I'm doing it with my 112 class. They are learning a lot more concepts than you guys are, though, so that's kind of why I said I would do that with them they wanted to. Anyway, I guess that's it. I miss you guys. I hope y'all are staying safe, and I hope we all don't kill our kids and our dogs because they're driving me crazy. Anyway, see you later. Bye.